A bullied teen helped an old lady cross the street, never realizing she was his long-lost grandmother. That singular moment, a hand extended in kindness amid a storm of cruelty, would alter the course of both their lives forever. Ethan Morgan hunched his shoulders against the biting November wind, his thin jacket offering little protection. At 17, he had mastered the art of invisibility, eyes down, shoulders curved, footsteps quick and silent. The bruise blooming beneath his left eye had finally faded to a sickly yellow, but the hollow ache inside his chest persisted, a permanent fixture these past 3 years at Westlake High. 3 more blocks to home. Just 3 more blocks of safety before tomorrow's gauntlet began again. The sharp crack of thunder split the darkening sky as fat raindrops began to fall. Perfect. Ethan quickened his pace. The weight of his backpack, stuffed with textbooks he excelled in but could never celebrate, dragging against his already aching shoulders. The math competition medal he'd won last weekend remained buried in his sock drawer. Another secret joy he couldn't share without inviting more torment from Dylan Reeves and his followers. Freak, Dylan had hissed that morning, shoulder-checking Ethan into the lockers hard enough to send his glasses skittering across the hallway floor. Why don't you do us all a favor and disappear? The memory alone made Ethan's stomach clench. 3 years of this, ever since his mother died and he'd moved in with his father. A man who existed more in absence than presence, drowning his own grief in long work hours and longer nights at Sullivan's bar. The rain intensified, plastering Ethan's dark hair to his forehead. He blinked water from his eyelashes, focusing on the crosswalk ahead. That's when he saw her. An elderly woman stood at the corner, clutching a plastic grocery bag in one gnarled hand, while the other trembled against a wooden cane. The wind whipped her silver hair around a face lined with years, her slight frame seemingly moments from being blown over entirely. She stepped forward hesitantly, then back again, clearly intimidated by the rushing traffic and steadily worsening storm. Ethan's first instinct was to hurry past. He was soaked, tired, and the familiar weight of loneliness pressed heavy on his chest. But something in the woman's uncertain posture, the vulnerable tilt of her chin against the elements, stopped him. It was like looking into a mirror, another invisible person struggling alone. Before he could overthink it, Ethan changed course. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. School days often passed without him speaking more than a handful of necessary words. "Do you need help crossing?" The woman turned, revealing eyes of such a startling, familiar blue that Ethan momentarily forgot the rain pelting his face. Something about those eyes, deep set under silver brows, crinkled at the corners, tugged at a memory he couldn't quite place. "Oh," she breathed, surprise warming her weathered features. "That would be very kind, young man. These old bones don't move like they used to, and this weather..." She gestured vaguely at the darkening sky with a trembling hand. Ethan noticed her fingers, knobbed with arthritis, skin paper thin but elegant somehow. A simple gold band, worn thin with decades, circled her ring finger. He offered his arm instinctively, surprised at his own boldness. "I've got you," he said quietly, feeling her bird-like hands settle into the crook of his elbow. "We'll wait for the light." They stood together in the rain, an unlikely pair. Ethan angled his body slightly, trying to shield her from the worst of the downpour. The woman glanced up at him, something flickering behind those remarkable blue eyes. "Such a gentleman," she murmured, her voice carrying a slight accent Ethan couldn't place. "Your mother must be very proud." The words landed like a physical blow. Ethan swallowed hard, grateful when the crosswalk signal changed, saving him from a response. He guided her carefully off the curb, matching his pace to her halting steps. "Careful here," he said as they navigated a puddle. The street's uneven. Halfway across, the woman's cane slipped on the wet asphalt. She lurched forward with a startled cry, but Ethan's reflexes were quick. He caught her weight against him, steadying her with surprising strength. "I've got you," he repeated more firmly this time. "We're almost there." When they reached the opposite sidewalk, the woman took a deep breath, her hand still resting on Ethan's arm. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but they were both thoroughly soaked. "Thank you, dear boy," she said, studying his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. Her gaze lingered on the fading bruise beneath his eye, though she didn't mention it. "My apartment is just down this street. Would you mind terribly walking an old woman the rest of the way?" Ethan hesitated. His father wouldn't be home for hours, if at all. There was nothing waiting for him but an empty apartment and the echoing silence that had replaced family dinners and his mother's laughter. "I don't mind," he said finally, surprising himself again. The woman smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face and stirred that strange sense of familiarity again. "I'm Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Winters." "Ethan Morgan," he replied automatically. Something flickered across Eleanor's face, too quick to identify before it was carefully tucked away. "Well, Ethan Morgan," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hand. "It seems this rain brought me some good fortune after all." They walked slowly down Maple Street, the ancient trees forming a canopy that offered minimal shelter from the lingering drizzle. Eleanor asked simple questions: what grade he was in, what subjects he enjoyed, and Ethan found himself responding with more than his usual monosyllabic answers. There was something disarming about her, as though they were continuing a conversation rather than starting one. "Here we are," Eleanor announced, stopping before a modest brick apartment building with window boxes still miraculously blooming with hardy autumn flowers. "Number 403. Ethan helped her up the 4 steps to the entrance, holding the door as she maneuvered inside. The small lobby was warm and smelled faintly of furniture polish and something baking. Cinnamon, maybe. "Would you like to come up for some hot chocolate?" Eleanor asked, turning those remarkable blue eyes on him again. "It's the least I can offer after you rescued me." "I didn't rescue," Ethan began, then stopped himself. The prospect of postponing his return to the empty apartment was tempting. "If you're sure it's no trouble." Eleanor's apartment on the 4th floor was small but immaculately kept, filled with books and framed photographs. A patchwork quilt draped over a worn armchair, and delicate teacups lined a glass-fronted cabinet. It felt like a home in a way Ethan's apartment hadn't since his mother died. "The bathroom is through there if you'd like to dry off," Eleanor said, hanging her coat on a wooden rack by the door. "There's a clean towel on the shelf. I'll get that hot chocolate started." The bathroom was tiny but spotless, decorated in faded blue tiles that had probably been installed decades ago. Ethan dried his face and hair with a soft towel that smelled of lavender, then studied his reflection in the oval mirror. The bruise was barely visible now, but dark circles shadowed his eyes. When had he started looking so worn? A framed photograph on the bathroom shelf caught his attention. A young woman with dark hair and a brilliant smile, holding a baby. Something about her smile, the shape of her eyes. "That's my daughter," Eleanor said softly from the doorway, making Ethan jump. She carried a bundle of folded clothing. "I thought you might like something dry to change into. These belong to my grandson, but..." Her voice trailed off. "They should fit you well enough." "Your grandson?" Ethan asked, accepting the clothes awkwardly. A shadow passed over Eleanor's face. "He'd be about your age now. I haven't seen him in many years." She straightened, visibly collecting herself. "The hot chocolate is nearly ready. Take your time." When Ethan emerged from the bathroom wearing borrowed sweatpants and a faded university sweatshirt, Eleanor was placing 2 steaming mugs on a small table by the window. Outside, the rain had intensified again, drumming against the glass. "Perfect timing," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit." The hot chocolate was rich and homemade, topped with tiny marshmallows that melted into sweet clouds. Ethan couldn't remember the last time someone had made him hot chocolate. Probably his mother, that last Christmas before the cancer diagnosis. "This is really good," he said, warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the beverage. "Thank you." "My pleasure." Eleanor wrapped her thin fingers around her own mug. "Now tell me about that bruise." Ethan nearly choked on his hot chocolate. "It's nothing," he said automatically. I bumped into a door." Eleanor's gaze was steady, unimpressed. "Young man, I may be old, but I'm not a fool. Someone hit you." The direct statement, delivered without judgment or pity, somehow loosened something in Ethan's chest. Before he could stop himself, words spilled out. About Dylan and his friends, the daily torment, how teachers looked the other way, how his father was too lost in his own grief to notice. "He works all the time," Ethan concluded, staring into his nearly empty mug. "And when he's not working, he's somewhere else. Even when he's home, he's not really there." "And your mother?" Eleanor asked gently. Cancer. 3 years ago." The familiar pain tightened his throat. "She was everything." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her face still except for a slight trembling around her mouth. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." "Truly." She reached across the table and laid her hand over his, a feather-light touch that somehow anchored him. They sat in silence as the rain continued its rhythm against the windows. 2 strangers connected by shared grief and a moment of kindness on a wet street corner. "It's getting late," Eleanor finally said, glancing at an antique clock on the bookshelf. You should get home before your father worries. Ethan doubted his father would notice his absence, but he nodded anyway. Thank you for the hot chocolate. And the dry clothes. Keep them, Eleanor insisted. It's dreadful out there. And perhaps, she hesitated, then continued with careful casualness. Perhaps you might stop by again? I bake on Thursdays and it's too much for just me. Something warm unfurled in Ethan's chest, the fragile tendril of connection. I'd like that, he said, surprised by how much he meant it. At the door, Eleanor pressed a folded umbrella into his hands. Until Thursday then. After school, Ethan nodded, oddly reluctant to leave the warm apartment and this strange, compelling woman with her familiar blue eyes. Thursday, he confirmed. Walking home under Eleanor's borrowed umbrella, Ethan felt lighter somehow, as though he'd set down a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. For the first time in 3 years, he had something to look forward to. Thursday. True to his word, Ethan returned to apartment 403 on Thursday afternoon. The rich scent of freshly baked cookies greeted him when Eleanor opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of him. You came, she said, as though she'd half expected him not to. I said I would, Ethan replied simply, offering the small bunch of daisies he'd impulsively picked up from the corner store. His mother had loved daisies. Eleanor's eyes widened, her hand trembling slightly as she accepted them. How thoughtful, she murmured. Daisies are my favorite. That Thursday became the first of many. Ethan found himself drawn to Eleanor's apartment like a compass needle to north. They fell into a routine, Tuesdays and Thursdays after school, and sometimes Saturday mornings. Eleanor always had something baking, and Ethan would help with small chores, changing light bulbs, reaching high shelves, carrying grocery bags up the 4 flights of stairs. Tell me about your math competition, she said one afternoon in December, as they shared apple pie at her kitchen table. Somehow, she always remembered the details of his life, when he had tests, the names of his few friends, his love of mathematics. You don't want to hear about that, Ethan demurred. It's boring. Nothing that lights up your face like that could possibly be boring, Eleanor countered. Tetinari, and to tell me, so he did. And when he explained the complex problem he'd solved to win first place, Eleanor listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed an unexpected aptitude for numbers. You're good at math, he said, surprised. Eleanor smiled, a hint of mischief in her expression. I taught high school mathematics for 37 years, young man. Just because I'm old doesn't mean my brain has turned to pudding. Ethan laughed, a real laugh that felt rusty from disuse. I never said you had pudding brain. Good thing, or you'd be wearing this pie instead of eating it. She teased, her eyes crinkling with humor. These afternoons with Eleanor became Ethan's sanctuary. In her apartment, he wasn't the weird, quiet kid with the absent father and dead mother. He wasn't a target or a ghost. He was just Ethan, someone worth listening to, someone who mattered. As winter deepened, Eleanor shared stories of her teaching years, of growing up during harder times, of falling in love with a boy who wrote her poetry. She showed Ethan old photographs and taught him to play chess on a hand-carved set that had belonged to her husband. But Ethan noticed there were gaps in her stories, years unaccounted for, names carefully avoided. The photograph of the dark-haired woman with the baby appeared in no other albums. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, Eleanor would study his face with an intensity that made him wonder what she was searching for. At school, things were marginally better. Dylan Reeves still existed, still sneered and made cutting remarks, but something had changed in Ethan. The words didn't sink as deep, didn't define him as completely. He had somewhere else to exist now, somewhere he was valued. What happened to your face? Eleanor demanded when he arrived one Tuesday in January, sporting a fresh cut on his cheekbone. Ethan touched it self-consciously. It's nothing, Ethan. Her tone brooked no argument. He sighed, dropping into his usual chair. Dylan Reeves happened. I got paired with Jenny Chen for the chemistry project, and he decided I was moving in on his territory or whatever. Cornered me after school. Eleanor's eyes flashed with a fierce protectiveness that startled Ethan. This needs to stop, she said, her normally gentle voice hard with conviction. Have you told anyone? A teacher? Your father? Ethan snorted. Dad's barely home enough to notice I exist, let alone that I'm getting pushed around. Something in Eleanor's expression shifted. A complicated emotion Ethan couldn't quite name. Your father, she said carefully. Michael, what is he like now? The question struck Ethan as odd. Now? Eleanor blinked, recovering quickly. I mean, since your mother passed, grief changes people. Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering. Before Mom got sick, he was different. He laughed more. We used to go fishing, and he taught me to change oil in the car. The memories felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Now he just works and drinks. Sometimes I think he looks at me and just sees her. Everything he lost. Eleanor was very still, her hands clasped tightly on the table. And you, Twina, what do you see when you look at him? Someone who's drowning, Ethan said after a long moment, and doesn't know how to ask for help. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the heaviness of the conversation. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll be 18 in August, and then I can apply for scholarships. Get out of here. It matters very much, Eleanor said softly. More than you know. Before Ethan could question her meaning, she rose and went to a drawer in the antique sideboard. When she returned, she was holding a small, worn book. This might help with your bully problem, she said, placing it before him. Ethan read the title aloud. Aikido Basics? He looked up, confused. You want me to learn martial arts? I want you to learn how to defend yourself without becoming like those who hurt you, Eleanor corrected. Aikido isn't about attacking. It's about redirecting energy, finding balance. She tapped the book. There's a community center on Elm Street that offers classes. The instructor is an old friend of mine. I can't afford. It's been arranged, Eleanor interrupted gently. Consider it a late Christmas gift. Ethan stared at her, a lump forming in his throat. No one had given him a real gift in years. His father usually managed a $20 bill tucked into a card when he remembered it all. Why are you doing all this for me? He asked, the question that had lingered for weeks finally finding voice. Eleanor's smile was tinged with something that looked almost like sorrow. Because you remind me of someone I love very much, she said. Someone I lost. It wasn't the whole truth. Ethan could sense that, but it was all she seemed willing to offer. He picked up the book, turning it over in his hands. Thank you, he said simply. I'll try it. The Aikido classes began the following week. The instructor, Mr. Takahashi, was in his 70s but moved with the fluid grace of someone half his age. He greeted Ethan with a knowing smile. Ah, Eleanor's young friend, he said, bowing slightly. She speaks highly of you. The dojo became another sanctuary, another place where Ethan could exist outside the confines of his usual life. The techniques were challenging, but made a strange, elegant sense to his mathematical mind. All angles and momentum, redirection rather than force. You have natural aptitude, Mr. Takahashi told him after the third class. And good instincts. You don't seek to dominate. Winter melted grudgingly into spring. Ethan's life had developed a rhythm he'd never expected. School, Aikido 3 times a week, afternoons with Eleanor, quiet evenings alone in the apartment he shared with his father's ghost. Michael Morgan was working even longer hours now, securing a promotion that kept him traveling to the regional offices. When they did cross paths, their interactions were stilted, limited to practical matters. I'll be in Chicago until Wednesday, his father informed him one Sunday morning, packing a small suitcase. There's money on the counter for food. Ethan nodded, not looking up from his physics textbook. Good luck with the presentation. Michael paused, suitcase in hand. For a moment, it seemed he might say something more, might breach the vast silence between them. Instead, he cleared his throat. Thanks. Don't forget to lock up. After he left, Ethan sat in the quiet apartment, textbook forgotten. A familiar restlessness crawled under his skin. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then dialed. Eleanor? It's Ethan. I know it's not our usual day, but can I come over? An hour later, he was helping Eleanor plant spring flowers in the window boxes outside her apartment. Careful with the roots, she instructed, demonstrating how to pack the soil gently around a delicate pansy. They need room to grow, but also support. Ethan followed her example, enjoying the feel of the cool, damp earth between his fingers. My mom used to garden, he said. We had vegetables in the backyard. She said there was nothing better than a tomato you grew yourself. Eleanor's hand stilled momentarily. She was right, she said softly. There's a special magic in growing things. They worked in companionable silence, the spring sun warm on their backs. Eleanor hummed occasionally, old songs Ethan didn't recognize but found soothing. My father's gone until Wednesday, he said finally, patting soil around a bright marigold. Another business trip. Eleanor straightened, wincing slightly as her back protested. You're welcome to have dinner here while he's away, she offered, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. No sense in you eating alone. Ethan smiled, relief washing through him. I'd like that. That evening, as they prepared dinner together in Eleanor's small kitchen, Ethan noticed her watching him with that same searching intensity. He'd grown used to these moments. The way her gaze would linger, how sometimes her breath would catch when he made a particular gesture or expression. "What?" he asked, pausing in the act of chopping carrots. Eleanor shook her head, a soft smile playing around her lips. "Just thinking how nice it is to have young energy in this apartment again." But there was more to it, Ethan was certain. Just as he was certain there was significance in the way she kept the photograph of the dark-haired woman and baby on her bedside table, or how she sometimes slipped and almost called him by another name. After dinner, they played chess, and Ethan finally managed to win a game. Eleanor laughed delightedly at his victory, teaching him the proper way to reset the pieces. "My husband carved this set," she told him, running a finger over the intricate knight. "James was very talented with his hands. He could fix anything." "You must miss him," Ethan said. Eleanor nodded, her eyes distant. "Every day for 30 years now. But that's the price of loving someone completely. You never quite stop missing them when they're gone." She looked up, meeting Ethan's gaze. "Just as your father has never stopped missing your mother." The comparison startled him. "Dad doesn't talk about Mom," he said. "Ever. Nah. It's like she never existed." "That doesn't mean he doesn't feel her absence," Eleanor said gently. "Some people carry their grief silently, afraid that speaking it aloud will break them entirely." Ethan considered this, turning a chess piece over in his hand. "How do you know so much about him?" A fleeting expression, almost panic, crossed Eleanor's face before she carefully composed her features. "I know grief," she said. "And I know what it's like to lose someone you believed would always be there." It wasn't a real answer, Ethan noted, just as she never really answered when he asked about her daughter, or why she had no contact with her grandson. As the evening grew late, Ethan reluctantly prepared to leave. At the door, Eleanor pressed a container of leftovers into his hands. "For lunch tomorrow," she said. "And Ethan, if you'd like to stay here while your father's away," the sofa pulls out into a quite comfortable bed. "Just so you're not alone in that apartment." The offer touched him deeply. "I might take you up on that tomorrow," he said. "Thank you." Walking home through the quiet streets, Ethan realized how much had changed since that rainy November day when he'd first helped Eleanor across the street. He stood straighter now. The hollow ache in his chest had diminished. Even at school, things were different. His quiet confidence from Aikido training had altered the way he moved through the world, and consequently, how others responded to him. Dylan Reeves still existed, still glared, but the physical bullying had largely stopped after Ethan had calmly redirected Dylan's shove in the hallway, using the most basic Aikido technique to send the larger boy staggering into a row of lockers without ever striking him. The look of shocked confusion on Dylan's face had been worth the 3 years of torment. Approaching his apartment building, Ethan was surprised to see lights on in their unit. His father's car wasn't in its usual spot, but perhaps he'd returned early, taken a taxi from the airport. He climbed the stairs quickly, a strange anticipation building in his chest. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe they could talk, really talk, about the vast emptiness between them. But when Ethan unlocked the door, it wasn't his father who turned from the kitchen counter, but a woman, blonde, wearing a short dress, a glass of wine in her manicured hand. "Oh," she exclaimed, clearly startled. "You must be Michael's son. He didn't mention you'd be home." Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, taking in the scene. 2 wine glasses, music playing softly, his father's jacket draped over a chair. "I live here," he said flatly. "Who are you?" "Kathy, from the Chicago office." Her smile was uncomfortable now. "Your dad just ran out for ice. He should be back any minute." As if summoned by her words, Michael Morgan appeared in the doorway behind Ethan, a bag from the corner store in his hand. He stopped short, color draining from his face. "Ethan," he said, "I thought you'd be at the library until late." Clearly, Ethan felt a cold anger building, displacing the momentary hope he'd allowed himself to feel. What happened to the Chicago presentation? His father at least had the decency to look ashamed. "It's tomorrow. We flew in early to prepare." "Right." Ethan stepped aside, gesturing stiffly. "Don't let me interrupt your preparation." "Ethan, wait." But Ethan was already moving, grabbing his backpack from where he dropped it and heading back to the door. "I'll stay at a friend's," he said, not looking at either of them. "Enjoy your evening." He was halfway down the block before his father caught up to him, still holding the bag of ice, now partly melted. "Ethan, stop. Let me explain." "Explain what?" Ethan whirled to face him. "That you lied about where you were? Or that you've been lying about working late all those other nights too?" Michael ran a hand through his graying hair. "It's not what you think. Kathy and I are colleagues. This is the first time she's been to the apartment. I don't care if she's your colleague or your girlfriend or whatever, Ethan said, the words bitter in his mouth. What I care about is that you're never there. Mom dies and it's like you decided to check out too, except you're still walking around, still breathing. His father flinched as if struck. That's not fair. Fair. Ethan laughed, a harsh sound that scraped his throat. Was it fair that I had to figure out how to keep living after Mom died, all by myself? That I've been getting bullied for 3 years and you never even noticed? That I haven't had a real conversation with you in so long, I can't remember what your voice sounds like, unless you're telling me you'll be late or you're leaving town? The words hung in the night air between them, years of unspoken pain finally finding voice. Michael stared at his son, something like recognition dawning in his eyes, as though seeing Ethan clearly for the first time in years. I didn't know, he said finally, his voice rough, about the bullying, about any of it. I've been, he trailed off, gesturing vaguely. Drowning, Ethan finished for him. I know, but so was I, Dad. So was I. They stood facing each other on the sidewalk, the bag of melting ice dripping onto Michael's shoes. In the distance, a siren wailed and faded. Where will you go? Michael asked finally. Ethan adjusted his backpack strap. I told you. A friend's... What friend? His father looked genuinely confused, and Ethan realized with a pang that Michael truly had no idea who existed in his life anymore. Her name is Eleanor, Ethan said. She lives over on Maple Street. She's been more family to me these past few months than you have in 3 years. The words were meant to hurt, and Ethan could see they hit their mark. His father's face crumpled slightly before he regained control. Eleanor. Michael repeated, something odd in his tone. Eleanor what? Winters. Why? Michael's face went very still. Eleanor Winters, he said carefully. About 70? Blue eyes. Used to be a math teacher? Now it was Ethan's turn to be confused. You know her? His father's laugh was short, humorless. Know her? He shook his head, disbelief written across his features. Ethan, if it's the same Eleanor Winters, she's your grandmother. The words didn't make sense at first. They hung in the air, disconnected from reality. That's not possible, Ethan said finally. Mom's parents died before I was born. And your mom's name was... He faltered, realizing he didn't actually know his paternal grandmother's name. His father never spoke of his family. Eleanor, Michael confirmed. Eleanor Winters, my mother. But... Ethan's mind raced, trying to reconcile this information with everything he knew. But why wouldn't she say anything? Why pretend to be a stranger? Michael sighed heavily, looking suddenly much older. Because I told her to stay away from us 15 years ago, and she respected that decision. He ran a hand over his face. At least she respected it until she met you. Ethan's head was spinning. Why would you do that? Why would you cut off your own mother? It's complicated, Ethan. Uncomplicated, Ethan demanded, anger resurging. I deserve to know. His father stared at the melting ice in his hand for a long moment, then nodded toward a bench at the small park across the street. You're right. You do deserve to know. Let's sit down. They crossed to the bench, sitting with careful distance between them. Michael set the dripping bag beside him, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. My father, your grandfather, was not a good man, he began, his voice low. He drank, and when he drank, he got mean. My mother protected me as best she could, but he shook his head. When I was 16, he put her in the hospital. That was the final straw. She divorced him, and we moved away, changed our name from Winters to my mother's maiden name, Morgan. Ethan listened, stunned. His father had never shared anything about his childhood before. We were close after that, my mother and I. She put herself through school, became a teacher. I went to college on scholarships. And then I met your mother. A ghost of a smile touched Michael's lips. Sarah was extraordinary, but my mother never thought she was good enough for me. They fought constantly. Why? Ethan asked, trying to reconcile this story with the gentle woman who baked cookies and taught him chess. Michael sighed. Class differences, mainly. My mother grew up poor, fought for everything she had. Sarah came from money, had opportunities my mother never dreamed of. The arguments got worse after we married, and when Sarah got pregnant, he shrugged. The final blow-up happened right after you were born. Things were said that couldn't be taken back. I chose Sarah, told my mother I didn't want her in our lives if she couldn't accept my wife. So you just cut her off? Your own mother? I was young and angry and in love. Michael said simply. It seemed like the right choice at the time. By the time I realized what I'd thrown away, pride kept me from reaching out. Then Sarah got sick, and everything else just disappeared. Ethan sat in silence, processing this revelation. All these months with Eleanor, his grandmother, and she'd never said a word. All those careful questions about his father. Those moments when she'd studied his face. She has a photograph, Ethan said suddenly. A woman holding a baby. That was Mom, wasn't it? And me? Michael nodded. Probably the only picture she had of you. Sarah sent it right after you were born, before things fell apart. Why didn't she tell me? Ethan demanded, hurt bubbling up through his confusion. All this time she knew who I was and she just pretended? Knowing my mother, she probably thought it was better than telling you the truth. That your father was the kind of man who would disown his own parent. Michael's voice was bitter with self-recrimination. Or maybe she was afraid you'd stop visiting if you knew. That I'd keep you from her again. Ethan stood abruptly. I need to talk to her. Now. Michael looked up at his son, indecision clear on his face. Ethan, it's late. Maybe tomorrow would be better. No. Ethan's voice was firm. I've spent 3 years with half a family, and now I find out I had a grandmother who cares about me, all along. I'm not waiting until tomorrow. After a moment, Michael nodded. All right, but I'm coming with you. Why? Ethan challenged. So you can tell her to stay away from me again? His father flinched. No, so I can apologize. 15 years too late. The walk to Maple Street was tense, neither Morgan speaking. Ethan's mind raced, replaying every interaction with Eleanor. No, with his grandmother, through this new lens. The careful questions. The photograph. The way she'd known daisies were his favorite flower, just like they'd been his mother's. The familiar blue eyes that had tugged at his memory from the first moment. When they reached the apartment building, Ethan hesitated only briefly before pressing the buzzer for 403. No answer. He pressed again, longer this time. Maybe she's asleep, Michael suggested. Ethan shook his head. She doesn't sleep well. She would have heard it. A trickle of worry began in his chest. Something's wrong. He pressed the buzzer for the building manager, who answered with sleepy irritation. When Ethan explained he was concerned about his elderly grandmother, the man buzzed them in with reluctant sympathy. 4th floor, Ethan said unnecessarily as they entered the building. The elevator was out of order, as it had been since Ethan's first visit, so they took the stairs, Michael struggling to keep up with his son's urgent pace. At apartment 403, Ethan knocked firmly. Eleanor? It's Ethan. Please open the door. Silence. Let me try, Michael said, stepping forward to knock more forcefully. Mom? It's Michael. Please, we need to talk to you. When there was still no response, the worry in Ethan's chest bloomed into full-fledged fear. The spare key, he said suddenly. She keeps one under the blue flower pot. The key was where it always was. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he fitted it into the lock and opened the door. Eleanor, he called, stepping into the familiar apartment. A single lamp burned in the living room, casting long shadows. The chess set was still set up on the small table by the window, pieces arranged exactly as they'd left them after Ethan's victory. But there was no sign of Eleanor. Check the bedroom, Michael suggested, his own voice tight with concern. Ethan moved through the apartment with growing dread. The bathroom was empty, as was the tiny kitchen. He paused at the closed bedroom door, suddenly afraid of what he might find. Eleanor? He called again, knocking softly. When there was no answer, he steeled himself and opened the door. The bedroom was dim, lit only by the streetlight filtering through the gauzy curtains. Eleanor lay on the bed, still in her gardening clothes, one hand resting on her chest, the other stretched toward the bedside table, toward the photograph of Sarah and baby Ethan. Eleanor! Ethan rushed to her side, heart hammering. She was so still, too still, but as he reached for her hand, he felt it. Warm, with a faint pulse beneath his fingers. She was breathing, shallow but steady. Such a Dad, he called. Call 911. She's alive, but something's wrong. Michael appeared in the doorway, phone already in hand. As he dialed, Ethan gently squeezed his grandmother's hand. Eleanor, he said softly. Grandma, it's Ethan. Can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. Those familiar blue eyes, his eyes, he now realized, struggled to focus. Ethan? Her voice was a thread of sound. You came back. Of course I came back, he said, blinking against sudden tears. Why didn't you tell me who you were? A faint smile touched her lips. I was afraid. Would lose you again. The ambulance is on its way, Michael said from the doorway, his voice strangled. 5 minutes. Eleanor's gaze shifted, widening as she saw her son. Michael? She whispered, disbelief and hope mingling in her voice. I'm here, Mom, Michael said, crossing to the other side of the bed and taking her free hand. I'm so sorry for everything. Tears slipped from the corners of Eleanor's eyes, tracking silver paths down her temples. My boy, she breathed. You came back too. What happened? Ethan asked, still holding her hand tightly. Are you in pain? Eleanor shook her head slightly. Just tired. My heart, not what it used to be. Her gaze returned to Ethan. How did you find out? Dad told me, Ethan said. After I mentioned staying with you tonight. You were coming to stay? A smile briefly illuminated her pale face. I would have liked that. You'll have plenty of chances, Michael said firmly. When you're better, we're not disappearing again. Eleanor's eyes drifted closed, then opened with visible effort. All these months, she murmured, watching you grow, so much like your mother. Her kindness. Why that day? Ethan asked suddenly. On the street corner in the rain. Was it really a coincidence? Eleanor's smile was tinged with mischief, even through her obvious exhaustion. Not entirely. I'd seen you before, walking home from school. Followed you once or twice. That day, you looked so sad. I couldn't bear it anymore. You orchestrated the whole thing? Michael asked, surprised. Pretended to need help crossing the street? Oh, I needed the help, Eleanor corrected. These old bones don't lie. But I might have chosen my moment carefully. Distant sirens grew louder, and Michael squeezed his mother's hand. The ambulance is almost here. You're going to be fine. Of course I am, Eleanor said with a shadow of her usual spirit. Now that I have my boys back. The next hours passed in a blur of paramedics, emergency room lights, and tense waiting. Heart attack, the doctor said. Minor, caught early, but at Eleanor's age, still serious. She would need monitoring, medication, changes to her lifestyle. She's stable, the doctor told them around midnight. We're keeping her for observation, but the prognosis is good. She's a fighter. She always was, Michael said quietly. They were allowed to see her briefly, just enough time to reassure themselves that she was indeed resting comfortably. Oxygen tubes in her nose, monitors beeping steadily beside her. She was asleep, looking smaller and more fragile than Ethan had ever seen her, but her color was better. In the hospital parking lot, father and son stood awkwardly beside Michael's car, which they'd retrieved from the apartment during the long wait. You should get some sleep, Michael said finally. I can drive you home. Ethan hesitated. What about Kathy? His father winced. I called her hours ago, told her to take a taxi to her hotel. She understood. Are you together? Ethan asked, not sure he wanted the answer. Michael shook his head. No, not really. It was just loneliness, I guess. He looked at his son directly. But that's not an excuse for any of it. I've been a terrible father these past few years. Not terrible, Ethan said after a moment. Just absent. I'd like to change that, Michael said quietly. If you'll let me. Ethan thought about Eleanor, how she'd orchestrated their meeting, created a space where he felt seen and valued, taught him to stand up for himself without becoming hardened. All because she'd recognized something in him worth saving, worth fighting for. I'd like that too, he said finally. They drove home in silence, but it was different now. Not the hollow silence of strangers sharing space, but the quiet of two people beginning to find their way back to each other. 3 months later, Ethan stood on the front steps of Westlake High School for the last time, diploma in hand. Senior year had ended, summer stretched before him, and beyond that, college, a full scholarship to study mathematics at his mother's alma mater. Smile, Eleanor called, snapping yet another photograph. She'd recovered well from her heart attack, though she tired more easily now. Today, however, her energy seemed boundless, her blue eyes bright with pride. Beside her, Michael adjusted his tie, looking both uncomfortable and pleased in his formal suit. Mom, I think you've taken enough pictures to fill an album already. It's my prerogative as a grandmother, Eleanor informed him loftily. I have 15 years of memories to make up for. Ethan laughed, posing dutifully for one more photo. The past months had been a time of healing, of rebuilding. Eleanor had moved into the spare room of their apartment. Just temporarily, she'd insisted, though they all knew better. The walls that had once echoed with silence now rang with chess matches, dinner conversations, and occasionally arguments. Real ones, where feelings were expressed rather than buried. Michael had reduced his work hours, turned down a promotion that would have meant more travel. He and Ethan had started fishing again, awkwardly at first, then with growing ease. They'd even begun sorting through Sarah's things together, a task Michael had been unable to face alone, finding comfort in shared memories rather than just pain. "One more with all three of us?" Eleanor directed, handing her camera to Mr. Takahashi, who had come to celebrate Ethan's graduation. The Aikido instructor positioned them carefully, making small adjustments to their stance with professional precision. As they posed together, the family that had been broken and found its way back together, Ethan thought about that rainy November day, about a simple act of kindness that had changed everything. A bullied teen had helped an old lady cross the street, never realizing she was his long-lost grandmother. But she had known, had orchestrated their meeting, created the opportunity for connection. And in doing so, she had helped him cross a different kind of street, from isolation to belonging, from grief to healing. "Perfect," Mr. Takahashi declared, capturing the moment forever. And it was.